Did Voldemort actually care about blood status? To anyone with even a passing knowledge of Harry Potter, this seems like an incredibly stupid question. The stated goals of the Death Eaters is a pure blood run state. You can see this in the pious thickness regime of the Ministry of Magic, where magic is might was quite literally the motto of the wizard government. All of the bad guys are constantly expressing hatred for mudbloods, muggles, and squibs. Lucius Malfoy sicked a giant death snake on a school to get rid of Muggleborns. Bellatrix Lestrange tortured a teenage girl with a knife for being a Muggleborn. And Dolores Umbridge was perfectly happy to run sham trials alongside literally soul-sucking demons to root out suspected Muggleborns. Here's the thing though, all of those guys were supporters of Voldemort. What did Voldemort himself actually think about blood status? Because I think Voldemort doesn't actually care. And I put together a very serious argument to back that up. Let's dig into it. Okay, I know a thumbnail like that is going to be a little bit provocative, so let me state at the front that Voldemort was an objectively evil dude, and there's no possible rationale anyone could create to say otherwise. We actively see him murder several innocent people, he topples a largely democratic government, and waged war against a peaceful people. Voldemort was evil, but the question is, was he actually hateful of people because of their blood status? His hatred for Muggles and Muggleborns has long been the stated and accepted narrative, but some things just aren't adding up. For starters, Voldemort himself is not a pureblood, he's a half-blood. His father was a Muggle. Voldemort hated his father, that's true, that's why he killed his father. But Voldy certainly doesn't hate himself. Quite the opposite, in fact. Voldemort is a megalomaniac. He's so high on his own greatness that at 16, he legitimately believed he was the greatest sorcerer in the world. Diary Riddle says as much in Chamber of Secrets.
A name I knew wizards everywhere would one day fear to speak when I became the greatest sorcerer in the world.
It would be pretty hypocritical of him to believe purebloods were supreme when he simultaneously believes that he, a half-blood, is the supreme magical being. Now, he is definitely allowed to be a hypocrite. Evil does not have to be logically consistent. That is true. But there's much more to Voldemort's actions that call a pureblood supremacist worldview into question. One of the big issues is the allies he picks. Voldemort actively allies with beings that purebloods consider lesser or even subhuman, like werewolves and giants. I really can't stress enough how much of a departure this is from the standard pureblood rhetoric. Werewolves in the wizarding world have literally struggled to be considered sapient life. I'm not lying about that or exaggerating. According to the Department of Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, and also the writings of the wonderful Mrs. Rowling herself, there are 3 classifications of entities in the Harry Potter universe. They are beasts, beings, and spirits. Spirits are pretty easy to understand, as that's just ghosts. Beasts and beings are a lot more complicated. One would think it would be pretty easy to differentiate between animal and man, but magic does confuse things. Humans, elves, centaurs, and goblins all fall in the being category, while creatures ranging from the simple flobberworm to the giant dragon are considered beasts. Werewolves, despite being humans afflicted with a magical disease, have spent years being pushed between the beast and being categories. At one point, there was a werewolf capture unit in the Department for Regulation and Control of Magical Beasts Division. Simultaneously, there was a werewolf support service that existed in the Being Division. The fact that Voldemort would willingly include such creatures in his pureblood supremacy organization is a major departure from historical wizarding precedent for this sort of belief system. And giants are only marginally better. I couldn't find much about their legal status in my research, but is a well-known fact the general wizarding populace, and especially those who have a thing about blood status like Dolores Umbridge, are deeply fearful of giants, and the wizarding population has corralled them into small stretches of land on the outskirts of civilization. Now, the most obvious retort to me saying Voldemort didn't care about blood status is the actions of the Ministry of Magic under the reign of Pius Thickness, who we all know was a puppet of the Death Eaters. Thickness was quite literally a puppet too, as he was under the Imperious Curse for his whole administration, which lasted from the late summer of 1997 to the early summer of 1998. Not even a full year. Despite the short tenure, Thickness instituted a number of reforms, such as putting known Death Eaters in positions of power and authority, such as Corbin Yaxley becoming the new head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and Severus Snape being instituted as the headmaster of Hogwarts. Pius's most notable anti-Muggle action would be the Muggleborn Registration Commission. Using falsified pseudoscience from the Department of Mysteries, the Death Eater puppet would declare that all Muggleborns had stolen their magic from some poor witch or wizard. Muggleborns, or people suspected of having no wizarding parentage, or harboring known race trait or beliefs, were rounded up and put through various show trials that usually found them guilty and then hauled them off, likely to never be seen again. Which means that I can probably end the video here, right? I mean, that seems like conclusive proof that Voldemort did care about blood status. I mean, if his government did this at his orders, that would be just it, right? Except for the fact that this government wasn't run by Voldemort. Okay, it was effectively run by him, but the actual governing was being done by the Death Eaters, not Voldemort. Now, each Death Eater would likely do anything with the wizarding government that Voldemort told them to do, but we don't actually see Voldemort tell them to do much, at least when it comes to the day-to-day management of the government. When Voldemort is first notified by Yaxley that Pius Thickness has been placed under the control of the Death Eaters, Voldemort is largely unimpressed. Despite nearly having the entire wizarding government in his grasp, Voldemort acts far more concerned about whether or not this new mind-controlled slave can get him to Harry Potter. The other Death Eaters, on the other hand, all act delighted at this news, with Antonin Dolohov even clapping Yaxley hard on the back in congratulations. Throughout the entirety of Deathly Hallows, despite making frequent trips into the inner thoughts of Lord Voldemort, he never spends any amount of time thinking about the Ministry or its Muggleborn policies. Voldemort remains far more interested with things that can put Harry Potter in the firing line. It is the Death Eaters that all express interest in blood status.
Yes, Draco's told me all about you and your parents. Muggles, aren't they?
This even goes beyond just Deathly Hallows. Do you know that in the entire series, a grown, adult Voldemort only appears in 4 out of the 7 books? That sounds kind of shocking, but believe me, I did check. He appears on the back of Quirrell's head in Sorcerer's/Philosopher's Stone. Then, in Chamber of Secrets, he isn't seen at all. We do get Diary Riddle, but that's technically a different entity. And also, I want to come back to him in a minute, because I want to construct a timeline of Voldemort's ideology. Voldemort is still absent for the entirety of Prisoner of Azkaban, before coming back in the flesh in Goblet of Fire. He fights Dumbledore in the Ministry of Magic at the end of Order of the Phoenix, and then, surprisingly enough, is only seen in visions and flashbacks during Half-Blood Prince, before being finally defeated in Deathly Hallows. Throughout all of his appearances, Voldemort only talks about blood status 4 times. And something I noticed on my most recent reread of the series is that he only does this when he has an audience. Blood status comes up briefly in Goblet of Fire during Voldemort's first audience with his returned Death Eaters. He specifically points out his own father and calls Dumbledore a, quote, muggle-loving fool. He then talks about blood status at the beginning of Deathly Hallows, at the same meeting where he was told by Yaxley of the Imperious Pius Thickness, Voldemort feeds Charity Burbage, Muggle Studies professor at Hogwarts, to Nagini, while talking about how detestable her views are. Finally, at the end of the book, while announcing the death of Harry Potter to the defenders of Hogwarts, Voldemort again talks about blood status, while torturing the pureblood Neville Longbottom. There is one other time he mentions hating Muggles and Muggleborns, as Diary Riddle in Chamber of Secrets, but I want to come back to that as it's important when I lay out the timeline.
We get there when we get there!
What do all three of these instances have in common? In each one, Voldemort has an audience of loyal supporters watching him. It's not something seen often with Voldemort as an adult, but Old Snakeface is a master manipulator. You primarily see this in the memories Dumbledore showed Harry in Book 6. Voldemort is many things, many of them bad, but one thing he isn't is stupid. The man was apparently one of the single best students Hogwarts ever had, and he also knew a few things. 1. While you could simply fight and steal and kill, it is far easier to have something you want given to you. 2. In order to effectively conquer the world, Voldemort couldn't do all the fighting on his own. He would need some outside support, if for no other reason than to take care of jobs he's too busy to do himself. In the Pensieve, we see that Tom Riddle rarely did anything that didn't in some way profit him. He didn't care about others, only what they could give him. Voldemort would lie, manipulate, and charm all sorts of people, like Horace Slughorn or Hepzibah Smith. Is it really that much of a stretch to say he would do the same to his own supporters? We know he's actually already done something in this department. Harry points out to Bellatrix that Voldy is a half-blood and is lying about being pureblood. Draco knows that Voldemort is lying about how, if Draco kills Voldemort, all of Lucius's failures will be forgiven. It simply stands to reason that Voldemort would, if he felt it necessary, lie to an army of wizards to give them sufficient motivation to fight on his behalf. He then rewards them by letting them run their own little Muggleborn-hating government. I hope by now I've established that Voldemort's actions with quote-unquote dark creatures are not consistent with a pure-blood supremacist mindset, and he certainly has the ability to lie and manipulate his Death Eaters into aiding him by catering it to that specific mindset. Now, let's go into his motivations for doing this, because this is where things start to make a lot more sense. Throughout the myriad looks we get into Voldemort's mind, sometimes that is a literal statement by the way, there are only two things that Voldemort is ever actively focusing on. The first is how to defeat Harry Potter, which honestly, it makes a lot of sense. Harry Potter is the chosen one. He is the child spoken of in the prophecy as one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, and that neither can live while the other survives. Voldemort is obsessed with the defeat of Harry Potter, because defeating him is absolutely necessary to accomplishing the second of Voldemort's two obsessions, immortality. Voldemort speaks more about immortality in the books than he ever speaks about blood status, as it comes up in nearly all of the previously mentioned speeches and several others. His immortality is mentioned in the Mirror Chamber at the end of Book 1, Diary Riddle mentions it in Book 2, it is talked about during the fight against Dumbledore in Book 5. I mean, that isn't even everything, that's just what I can think of off the top of my head. He's also constantly thinking about it in all of his memories and flashbacks. Bare minimum, Voldemort definitely cares more about his immortality than he cares about blood status. This is because Voldemort fears death above everything. In the previously mentioned Dumbledore fight, he specifically says that nothing is worse than death. According to the writings of J.K. Rowling, Voldy fears death so much that his Boggart would turn into his own corpse. Immortality is Voldemort's ultimate goal, and a goal like that changes a person's worldview. Voldemort is thinking long-term, or at least he's attempting to think long-term. Despite being completely evil, Voldemort is actually remarkably patient. He was willing to bide his time for nearly a decade to get a shot at the Philosopher's Stone, and regularly employed lengthy plans to achieve his other goals, such as the Triwizard Tournament conspiracy. I mention his long-term planning skills and his fear of death because I think it reveals that Voldemort has a greater and more evil plan than simply running a pureblood supremacist state. What if Voldemort's ultimate goal is the death of all magic? As established, Voldemort, if he achieved all of his stated goals, would live forever. His followers, not so much. I highly doubt this guy would share the keys to immortality with literally anyone. He would be alone for all eternity, which is how he kind of likes it, as he despises all people and feels no affection whatsoever. Voldemort targets Harry because, as specifically stated by the prophecy, Harry is a threat to Voldemort's own immortality. Voldemort would also know that even if he succeeds in defeating Harry Potter, there will always be people who hate him. While he doesn't understand why someone would ever hate him for moral reasons, he definitely would understand that people would be envious of his power and ability.
Why would you do that?
Oh, gosh, countless moral reasons could have applied.
Now, it stands to reason that the only possible type of person that could threaten his immortality would be a witch or wizard. I mean, no muggle is going to be able to figure out what a Horcrux even is, let alone figure out how to find one and destroy it. Therefore, the greatest threat to Voldemort, outside of specifically Harry Potter, would be the greater wizarding populace. Now, he has a large chunk of them eating out of his hand, but that requires effort and carefully manipulating them against other wizards. Once they win, can you really see people like Bellatrix and Lucius peacefully enjoying life under Voldemort? No! They'd be jockeying for power against one another and just generally fighting for a better seat at Voldy's table. What if one of them starts getting ideas that maybe they could do better than the Dark Lord? And if not about them, what about their children, or their children's children, or their children's children's children? Voldemort believes he could likely handle anyone who does arise to threaten him, but why even allow it to get that far when there's an easy solution? Letting them just kill themselves. It is a well-known fact in the wizarding world that without regularly interbreeding with the Muggle populace, wizard kind would die out. It is such a well-known fact that Ronald Bilious Weasley, at the ripe old age of 12 years old, is well aware of it. Ron, who has many other lovely qualities, is not exactly a paragon of intelligence. Now, Ronald definitely has a biased upbringing, what with Arthur Weasley's Muggle-loving worldview rubbing off on him from an early age, but the stats actually bear this fact out. While we don't have an exact breakdown of the Wizarding World populace, we can actually paint ourselves a pretty decent demographic picture based on some of our main characters, and it isn't looking good for the purebloods. For starters, many of the most pure families are already so inbred that they have severe mental issues. Most notably, the Gaunts fall into this category, but according to Sirius, he's related to nearly every other major pureblood family. On top of that, modern pureblood families seem to be having very few children. The Malfoys only have one child. Sirius's parents only had 2. The largest pureblood family I could find around the approximate time period of the books was actually Sirius's uncle Cygnus, who had all of 3 children. Based only on demographics, the pureblood supremacy culture is headed for total collapse within only a handful of generations, especially if they don't start making things worse with further inbreeding. Here's the thing though, I think Voldemort knows all this and actively wants it to happen. He would certainly be aware of what pureblood mania has done to his own family tree, as he knew what his uncle Morphin Gaunt was like. Voldemort invaded Morphin's mind in order to frame him for the murder of Voldemort's father and grandparents. Voldemort's also good enough at long-term thinking to see what the population of purebloods are doing to themselves. I think he just doesn't care about it. By allowing the pureblood supremacist ideology to flourish, by encouraging it to flourish with his various speeches, and by picking those types to be his personal army, Voldemort has set up a total magical societal collapse. Best case scenario, magic will be hemmed in to only a select few that Voldemort could easily keep an eye on. Worst case scenario, magic itself dies out amongst the human population. Both of these situations are completely advantageous to Lord Voldemort. The odds of anyone ever again threatening him or his Horcruxes will have plummeted to almost zero. Total victory for Team Voldy, a team of one person. Now there's one big hiccup in my description of Voldemort's worldview. Diary Riddle. In Chamber of Secrets, the Horcrux of 16-year-old Tom Riddle, to an audience of only Harry Potter, actively talks about hunting Muggleborns. Luckily, things like worldviews are not set in stone. Riddle even shows it in this very interaction with Harry. Upon learning Harry's story, Harry Potter becomes the obsession of even 16-year-old Voldemort, as once again, Harry is the threat to Voldemort's immortality. I believe Voldemort once cared about blood status, but his views changed over time. To illustrate this, let me try to lay out a timeline of Voldemort's worldview. Voldemort began life in Wool's orphanage, where he discovered his magic at an early age. Believing himself to be special, or more important, a running theme in his life, Tom Riddle would bully and threaten the children of his orphanage. At age 11, he met with Albus Dumbledore and was welcomed into the world of magic. Finally, an answer to the question that plagued his young life. Why am I so awesome? Answer, because I'm a gosh dang wizard. At Hogwarts, Tom Riddle was promptly sorted into Slytherin House, where two things would have happened. First, he would have very quickly learned about the notion of blood supremacy. Slytherin House was rife with it and likely had it even worse in those days. I think it's even highly possible that Tom's peers in Slytherin looked down at him in the beginning as a poor orphan with no family. Now, Tom likely gained a lot of their respect with his raw ability and talent, as well as his skill with flattery and manipulation. But he was now being told by the vast majority of his housemates that the family you come from, the status of your blood, makes some people more special than others. Possibly as a result of their disdain, or possibly due to his own narcissism fueling him to find greater distinction, the second thing that happened is Tom dug through Hogwarts records to find his long-lost family, eventually discovering the Gaunts and his own connection to Salazar Slytherin, leading to the first opening of the Chamber of Secrets. At this point in the game, I think blood purity would still be a very big deal to Tom Riddle, which is why it's included in the 16-year-old version of him in the Diary Horcrux. It is what connected him to Salazar, and he was indoctrinated at a young age into a house full of people telling him how important things like blood are. It was also in this time that he'd start putting together his first proto-Death Eaters, preparing secretly for the First Wizarding War.
You're the heir of Slytherin. You're Voldemort.
Surely you didn't think I was going to keep my filthy Muggle father's name.
Where things start to change would be near the end of his time at Hogwarts. Upon discovering the Gaunts, Tom would go looking for his mother's family. Instead of finding a family of purebloods waiting to welcome him, Tom found one man, his Uncle Morphin. Filthy, alone, and living in a shack that was quickly falling apart. Too stupid and spiteful to even care for himself. It's not known for certain if Tom knew his father was a Muggle or not. We know he suspected his father wasn't a wizard, but Morphin was not only able to confirm Tom's parentage, but he also told Tom where that man lived. I think this is the exact point where Tom would start to throw out his pure-blood supremacist mindset. It wouldn't happen overnight, but this is the turning point. The pure-blood family Tom had been searching for were a bunch of disappointments at best. His Muggle family was certainly no better, seeing as his father abandoned him as a baby to a life of luxury. What is a man in such a position left to do? Answer: burn it all to the ground. Tom murders his Muggle father and grandparents, and he blames his only other living family, a pure-blood wizard. Morphin would die in Azkaban, cutting off all branches from Voldemort's family tree. And I think Tom Marvolo Riddle went with them. Lord Voldemort would reign from here on out. After the disappointment that comes from learning of his own family, I think Voldemort starts to put two and two together. Blood status ultimately means nothing. He, Voldemort, is what makes him great, not his family or how he was born. Unfortunately, Voldemort is such a narcissist and megalomaniac that the conclusion he reaches after accepting this fact is that he, Voldemort, must rule all, as he is uniquely incredible, and anything that could potentially threaten that must be eradicated, with extreme prejudice. Voldemort had likely already begun researching things like Horcruxes and other methods of immortality. It is unknown if he had made a Horcrux out of Marvolo's ring or the diary at this point, but he would definitely make them very soon, and go hunting for more objects he felt worthy of turning into vessels for his soul. It's important to note that upon graduating Hogwarts, Voldemort specifically rejects using any of his pureblood friends' connections to secure him political power in the Ministry. Instead, he struck out on his own to solve the problem of his own mortality first. Along the way, I think he began scheming for what to do with all the free time he expected to have. Seeing as he never cared for anyone, eradicating all threats at the root would likely be a high priority, and that is including magic itself. Once having immortality largely secured, Voldemort would dig up his old contacts, many having children of their own now, that he, Voldemort, could recruit with the promises of a pureblood utopia, one that was secretly designed to implode in on itself, and Voldemort would launch the first Wizarding War. We all know how that would go down. After all, there are only 7 books to break that down.
I checked this out weeks ago for a bit of light reading.
This is light.
What do you think? Was blood purity really Voldemort's true goal, or was his evil even greater than that? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. I am Landon, this has been Landon-Core. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.